Was everyone shocked to find out your midterm score? This is what I did, and I have to be honest. Because practically everyone did so poorly, class average as of now it's 65, but it was 55. So what I did was delete 3 questions from the list of 30. The ones that you all did so poorly. You know what I'm saying? So everyone got an extra 10 points. So the score you have is a score with this extra 10 points that I gave you. So I don't know what it is. Again, the real tough questions I would say were like 5, okay, where you really had to read the textbook, okay, carefully. Other questions were from the lecture notes that I have uploaded, and this tells me that many of you just did not study for it. I don't know what else to say other than to say that you should try harder for the final exam, okay? And having said that, there's another announcement. I'll be heading off to Indonesia next Tuesday for, I have to give a lecture, presentation for your information on Hallyu. And if the timing was okay, I would have done the online lecturing from Indonesia, but the class time coincides with my arrival. So what I'll have to do is to record a lecture like a Monday evening and upload it at 9 o'clock sharp on Wednesday, and that'll be done by our trusted TA, okay? So that's in store for you next week, okay, next Wednesday. For today, we have to finish up this topic on religion in Korea, and we did a introduction and also talked about the theories of religion and the 2 theories, functionalism and conflict theory. In today's class, the focus will be on Korea, okay? Starting with a brief historical survey, followed by how Korea is marked by religious diversity, unlike, let's say, the United States, where it's predominantly Christian, right? So we'll see how this is the case in Korea. And I'll finish up with a discussion on how Protestant Christianity is the largest religion in Korea. And it's a very unique phenomenon because in all of Asia, we're talking about 48 countries, Korea is the only country where Protestant Christianity is a major religion, let alone the largest religion, okay? So we'll discuss how that happened, okay? Okay, so we had the introduction, theories of religion, and third, brief historical survey. And I think if you have read the first textbook, you would have sort of get a glimpse into this particular part. So I have sort of demarcated Korean religious history into like 4 periods. First is a long period because it includes the 3 Kingdoms period, Goryeo Dynasty, and Joseon Dynasty, and again, very brief. From time immemorial, as everyone knows by now, Koreans believed in shamanism, their indigenous religion. During the 3 Kingdoms period, and that's 57 before the Common Era, commonly known as BC before, right? Before Christ, but now it's more common to use this designation, right? And 668 Common Era. So this is the period during which Confucianism and Buddhism were introduced to Korea from China. The specific years are hard to come by because there's no real record that indicates when or in what year these religions were introduced to Korea. But suffice to say, these two religions were introduced to Korea during that period. Buddhism was de facto state religion. In later Shilla or Unified Shilla, and it was an officially sponsored faith. And I told you it would be brief, right? And Buddhism enjoyed even more success during the Goryeo dynasty. Actually, Goryeo dynasty is strongly identified as a period in which Buddhism flourished the most in Korea. Okay, this is when monks and temples received extensive privileges and financial support, and Buddhist temples became influential centers, replete with extensive infrastructure, cadre, tenants, slaves, and commercial ventures. Again, temples were all that and plus. Okay. And monks, they became politically involved and were embroiled in many types of corruption. And what I just said has implications for the succeeding dynasty because, again, this is not just a guess. This really happened. The monks were corrupt. Maybe you can say the same thing for priests during the Middle Ages in Europe, and here a little bit worse. Okay, and because of this, what happened in the succeeding dynasty is noteworthy. During the Joseon dynasty, so this is the last dynasty of Korea, right? From 1392 to 1910, this is when all religions other than Confucianism were banned. And Buddhism was especially targeted for the reasons I just said earlier, right? Because Buddhism during the Goryeo dynasty was corrupted, okay? The monks, okay? So, in upholding Confucianism as its ruling ideology, the Joseon dynasty carried out this policy called, or decree, respect Confucianism and oppose Buddhism. Okay? Although that was the decree, all other religions were banned as well. Okay? So, this is when monks were chased out of towns. Okay? So they were. That's why, if you ever wonder why, like the temples are all in the mountains, it has its tradition from the Joseon dynasty. Okay, and monks during the Goryeo dynasty, if you had a monk in your family, it was a family honor that you bragged about to everyone in the village. But with the advent of the Joseon dynasty, monks were in the same class as slaves and giseng. Can you believe that? From heaven to hell in the span of a few decades. Okay. And these restrictions against monks and Buddhism continued until the 19th century. Okay? Practically until the the last few decades of the Joseon dynasty. So that's sort of a first period, Three Kingdom period, Goryeo dynasty, and Joseon dynasty. So you should get a feel for that, right? So you have a strong presence of Buddhism up to Goryeo dynasty, but because it was corrupt, the new dynasty comes along and they try to sort of overcome this checkered past of Buddhism. So they ban Buddhism, right? Now, so the second period that I have sort of singled out, 1784, this is also during the Joseon dynasty, right? Because Joseon dynasty is 1392 to 1910, right? So, but it deserves its own sort of period because it marks a significant event in the history of religion in Korea, because it's the first time a new religion was introduced to Korea in about 2,000 years. Okay? So the first religion, foreign religion, to be introduced to Korea in about 2,000 years, and that happened to be Catholicism. Okay? And Catholicism was introduced in 1784 when the son of an ambassador to China returned to Korea with, literature on Catholicism, written in Chinese, of course. Okay? So these books were shared among his friends, and they got attracted to it, and they formed a church. Okay? They formed this group of let's say Catholicism followers. They read the text together, they had discussions, and they also had masses. Of course, without the presence of a priest, of course. Okay? So there was a Catholic church for about a half a century without a single priest or a single Catholic missionary being present on the peninsula. Okay? So this marks a very unique history of Catholicism anywhere in the world. Okay? Again, typically for a missionary religion to begin anywhere, it starts with a missionary present, right, in a new society. But the Korea was an exception for the Catholic Church. So again, for about a half a century, Catholicism was practiced among Koreans in the absence of a single Catholic missionary. This is an illustration from the 1901 book by a French artist, just to give you a sense of how things must have been back in 19th century. Okay? Anyway, but the arrival of Catholicism, or introduction of Catholicism in Korea, did not go smoothly because Catholics were subjected to series of persecutions that lasted over a century, which killed up to 10,000 Catholics. So up to 10,000 Koreans were martyred for following this new religion. Okay? And more importantly, because Catholicism taught that one should not be practicing ancestor worship, and at the time, by law, you had to practice ancestor worship. And why was ancestor worship a problem? Because it was considered a form of idolatry, right? Well, here we go. Catholics suffered numerous rounds of persecution in the late 18th century and throughout the 19th century. Up to 10,000 martyrs, including 10 French missionaries, missionary priests, died in persecutions which lasted for over a century. The vast majority of the martyrs were simple lay people, including men and women, married and single, and old and young. By the time of the last persecution in 1866, which alone resulted in around 8,000 martyrdom, there were only 20,000 Catholics in Korea, meaning that up to a half of all the Korean Catholics were martyred. And the way they were martyred is typically beheading or starvation to death. Okay? And there were many other ways by which they were martyred, but it was bad. Again, the martyrs were killed for following what was considered a false religion and for refusing to perform Confucian ancestral rituals. Now, there's a nice, so I don't know if I should call it nice, but this happened, okay, because of Korea having so many martyrs. In May 1984, at a mass attended by 600,000 Korean Catholics in a square in central Seoul, Pope John Paul II conferred sainthood on 93 Koreans and 10 French missionaries who gave their lives for their faith between 1839 to 1867. Well, they're nice. Now, this is where I guess it's nice. So the occasion marked the first canonization outside Rome since the Middle Ages. So when Pope confers sainthood, it takes place at the Vatican City, okay? But for the first time, back in 1984, it happened outside Rome, right? And the 103 martyrs canonized were the largest number of saints created on one occasion. Okay? The record that's still not broken. And the large number of Korean martyrs, 93, makes South Korea a country with the fourth largest number of saints in the world, according to the Catholic Church, of course, after Italy, Spain, and France. Trivia fact. Now, why then? One of the key reasons why, so many Catholics were martyred was mentioned, right? For refusing to perform ancestral ritual, but there are actually other reasons too. Okay, so the first one is already mentioned. Second is Catholicism was seen as a subversive influence because for Catholics, God would always come first before even the king. So, Confucianism, as you may know, doesn't really say much about God, right? So if there's anything or any person which sort of stands above or in the same rank as God is the king, right? So because Catholics believe that God always came first, Catholicism was seen as a subversive influence. And a third reason for the persecution against Catholics was, ulterior motive. If you look at the Joseon dynasty, it is marked by constant struggles among factions for control of of power, right? So there was a power struggle among different factions throughout the duration of the Joseon dynasty. And let's say, a faction in power, if it sees a competing faction that is sort of a little bit hospitable to Catholicism, they were targeted as being sympathizers of this foreign evil religion. Okay, so if to make a further point about the third point, you know how I won't name names, but in any given society, when there's an election, you know how politicians tend to overdo or oversay certain points to make themselves appear more patriotic or more conservative or more progressive, right? Similar situation, okay? The third sort of period, and this also happened during the Joseon Dynasty, and it's the introduction of Protestantism in 1884. So it's exactly 100 years later than the introduction of Catholicism. Unlike Catholicism that was introduced to Korea through a Korean, Protestantism was formally introduced when Protestant missionaries arrived in Korea in 1884. Their arrival in Korea was part of missionary expansion in Asia following their efforts in China and Japan. So as I will talk about this later, why it's only Korea that responded favorably to Christianity, you have to also know that it was not because there were no missionary efforts in China and Japan. There were actually more missionaries sent to these countries, more money was spent, but nothing really happened in these two countries. So I'll talk more about that later. So another interesting thing about the history of Protestantism in Korea is that it may have been first introduced to Korea in Seoul, but it flourished the most in the north, especially in Pyongyang, currently the capital of North Korea. Remember what I said on Monday, where religion flourishes the most among the poor and the dispossessed? Korea is a classic example. Throughout Korean history, North Korea suffered from more starvation, less food, and also socially they were discriminated. Okay, so North Korea by far was more open to Christianity than Koreans in the South. Okay, and so a large majority of the Korean Christian population prior to the de facto division in 1945 lived in the northern half of the peninsula. Again, not a small majority, but a large majority of the Korean Christian population before the division of Korea lived in the northern half of the peninsula. Pyongyang was the center of Christianity in Northeast Asia, renowned among the missionaries as the Jerusalem of the East. Again, Pyongyang had a nickname, okay? Jerusalem of the East, because so many residents of Pyongyang responded favorably to this new religion, okay? This is a Pyongyang church in the first decade of 20th century, sorry. It's just a priceless picture. And this would be the last period I talk about, and what I talk about under religious diversity, it's modern period, okay? and it's the Japanese colonial period, not from 1910 to 1945. And it also has its own sort of characteristics as far as religion is concerned. During the Japanese colonial period, religious freedom was generally suppressed. The reason why Japanese authorities were suppressive of, regarding religion was because it was worried that Koreans may sort of develop this sense of community and a sense of collectivity that makes them become more focused on, you know, sort of independence, right? And so the target was especially against the church, especially the Protestant church, because whereas Buddhists, they don't have a regular gathering, right? They'll just go to a temple to pray, whereas, you know, the Christianity has this regular meeting and activities, right, on a weekly basis. And when Koreans gather, they worried that they, again, may engage in independence movement. So that's why it was suppressed against religion, especially Christianity, right? But when you talk about religion in Korea under the Japanese colonial rule, the issue that really affected so many people was this compulsory attendance at local Shinto shrines. Okay? Well, this is your first keyword for today, Shinto. Look it up. It's a Japanese indigenous religion, and just get a sense of what it is, okay? Now, by 1936, shrine worship was made compulsory for students at all levels. And under the National Mobilization Law of 1938, laws requiring Christian schools to visit shrines were expanded to include all Christians. Now, you may ask, why is this a problem? Then the answer is there. Okay? See, attendance at or shrine worship or Shinto shrine worship amounted to Japanese emperor worship. Okay? So if you look up Shinto, you know, you're not going to be looking at anything related to emperor, Japanese emperor being like a descendant of God. But this Shinto was reinvented as state Shinto by Imperial Japan. Okay? When we use the term Imperial Japan, it's from 1868 to 1948, and this is when Japan colonized many countries in Asia. It invaded many countries in Asia, and also started this war with the US, right? So, and this is when, again, Shinto was reinvented as state Shinto. Why? It was reinvented to inspire national integration, unity, and loyalty. And what I mean by that is this. Imperial Japan wanted to realize its imperialistic ambitions or visions, which was to colonize many countries in Asia and become a superpower, right? Now, in order to drum up support for those efforts, and also, you know, to honor the war dead who will, you know, not in the beginning, but in due time, they did have their share of war deads. So they invented this to, again, mobilize Japanese to you know, sort of strongly support the government ambitions, and also to actively participate as laborers and also as soldiers, right? So again, if you type Shinto, you get some ideas as to what the religion is. If you type state Shinto, you also get a separate entry, okay? And you'll get a sense that it's very different from Shinto, okay? And it emphasizes many things, but the most important thing is the emperor is a divine being. It's like God, okay? And the state Shinto also argues that the Japanese people are descendants, okay, of this demigod, okay? And they, just like Korean Dangun myth, they have their own myth which says that they're descendants of this one god, and they therefore are all unified as a large national family, right? And it's all part of this state Shinto. Now, having said that, so you can understand how this was a sensitive issue to Koreans, right? Yes, they were colonized, but should they believe in the same religion or participate in this religion that celebrates Japanese identity, Japanese, royalty? So that's why this is a controversial issue to this day, because Koreans were forced at the time not only to not speak Korean and to adopt, I don't know how many other former colonies, or the people of former colonies were subjected to such so-called cultural genocide, but that's what Koreans were subjected to. Even in the religious sphere, they had to participate in this religion that glorified Japanese culture, Japanese royalty, and so on, right? So that's why for Koreans, it was a cultural issue, right? Because they were saddened by the fact that they were colonized by the Japanese, but they were almost forced to empathize with Japanese culture, okay? The culture of their oppressor, right? But for the church, they had no problem with this Shinto shrine worship culturally, but they had problems with its religious aspect. Meaning, just like Christianity was against ancestor worship because it was a form of idolatry, churches sort of basically, especially the Protestant church, saw state Shinto as a form of idolatry because it is a worship of Japanese emperor as God or demigod. Okay, so again, when you talk about what happened to religion in Korea during the Japanese colonial period, there are many things to talk about. For example, the Korean Protestant Christians' involvement with independence movement, but almost more importantly, this state Shinto shrine issue is something very significant. Okay. And following the liberation in 1945 and subsequent division of Korea, many Christians in the communist north fled to the south. And Christians who settled in the south at the time were reportedly more than 1 million. Okay? Because when the communists took over North Korea, they largely targeted two groups of people, and one was landowning capitalists, and second was Christians, because Christians happened to be the most powerfully organized group of people, and communists obviously did not want that. All right. Any question about this very brief religious history of Korea? Okay. This section just, shows you the kind of sort of a snapshot of religion in modern contemporary Korea, and I'll be showing you some tables that I've already showed you before. Okay, but one thing that is safe to say is that religion remains vibrant in Korea. Still, we have, remember I talked about secularization? It's almost as if secularization is not really happening in Korea. I mean, that's how the energy, religious energy seems to be very bright, vibrant in Korea. So South Korea has no official religion, and there is no real one dominant religion as in many other countries. Okay? Shamanism, Buddhism, and Christianity, as well as new religious movements, coexist peacefully in one of the most religiously pluralistic countries in the world. Confucianism, believe it or not, still attracts a considerable number of devotees. About 76,000 Koreans still identify Confucianism as their religion. I'm surprised that Confucianism is still listed as a religion with which respondents can identify as their religion, okay? Given such a small number, that is. And I guess this is a well-known fact by now. Protestantism is the largest religion with nearly 10 million followers, and that makes it nearly 20% of the total population in Korea. Buddhism is the country's second largest religion with 7.6 million followers, comprising about 16% of the population. 4 million followers. Go through this a little bit slowly, okay? Again, Korea is considered a country with a religious diversity because, as you remember, there are a sizable number of Christians, sizable number of Buddhists, and also that, having those two main religions itself is good enough to count as having a strong religious diversity, right? But if you look at regions like the Middle East and North Africa, it's 93% Muslims, so it's the religious diversity is low, right? Latin America and the Caribbean, it's predominantly Christians, so religious diversity also low. And North America and Europe, although Christianity is not as dominant as it is in Latin America, it's sizable enough to, if I were to sort of make this kind of a graph, I will reword these. I'll put very low, 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 high, very high, okay? Because if more than 3/4 of the population live in one religion, I think that's high enough for me, okay? Not moderate, okay? And I showed you this before, right? Okay, so largest, second largest, third largest, and again, if you happen to be writing a paper on Korea for any course, a good topic would be why there are so many Koreans who have no religious affiliation. Okay? So this is a pie graph. So Protestantism, Buddhism, Catholicism, and others, unaffiliated, whopping 56.1%. And this, in comparison to the world population by religion, you can see how Korea just stands out, right? Among the world population, the unaffiliated counts for only 16.3%. So the rate in Korea is about 4 times higher than the world average. And again, I think I showed you this before. Which nationalities consider religion most important? Again, this goes to show you how religion tends to be more popular in countries that are poor. Okay? But there is one exception, and that is the USA. Right here. Okay? Right here. So over 50% of the population in the US consider religion as most important, and so you can see, how USA sort of stands out. Okay? So what is noteworthy about the religious situation in Korea is that although the country experienced a rapid economic development and urbanization from the early 1960s to the end of the 1980s, religion shows no sign of losing its influence or power. And other indicators which show the pervasive influence of religion in Korea include well, I hope you know this by now. When you talk about NGOs, and you know, to the question of which NGO is most powerful, you know the answer now, right? It's religion. Okay? Most powerful by far. Can you name anything that comes close to being as powerful and wealthy as religion or religious bodies? I'm talking about NGOs. Human Rights Watch? Wild Animal Fund? Just kidding. Just kidding in the sense that, again, there's nothing that comes close. Okay? That's why I argued in this paper that I wrote. Have you heard of corporate social responsibility? So firms, they're finally realizing that they gotta be doing things more than just making money, okay? To take responsibility for like the environment and so on, right? What is church doing? So that's why I came up with the term ecclesiastical social responsibility, ESR, okay? So the same idea. Church has a responsibility, not only offering salvation to people, but making this world a better place to live. Isn't that a wonderful argument? Although I said it, but I think it's churches and other religious bodies need to heed that. Okay. Anyway, here we go. Just amazing, right? How this is just Korea. Okay. Religious organizations, right? They're a major employer. Okay. They operate schools at all levels of education. Can you believe that 1/5 of colleges and universities are owned by churches, religious bodies? Okay. Also Buddhist sects. They operate hospitals and research institutes, operate commercial enterprises like newspapers and printing houses. They also have their own nationally broadcast cable network. Protestant Church actually has 3 nationally broadcast cable networks. Okay? They also provide various social services, including orphanages, shelters for the homeless, childcare, and so on. Well, this last point needs to be qualified. For operating these sort of services, government does provide subsidies. Okay, okay, I think that's good enough. All right, before I move on to the last section, any question or comment? Okay. Moving on to the last section, the rise of Christianity. So this should be the rise of Protestantism, right? Because that's what the focus is. So there are a few things I've already said, so I'm going to skip. Well, just for fun, so 10 million followers in Korea. Which country do you think has the largest Protestant population in the world? Hint, think of one of the largest countries with the largest populations. One of the. Well, the fact that you're having a hard time coming up with the answer shows that this is a good question. Because I myself sort of got to find out yesterday. Anyway, here we go. It's the US. Number 2, Nigeria. Now, number 3 is a surprise. You know why? It's China. Some estimates actually have it more than 100 million. Okay? If that is the case, China would be number 2. Followed by Brazil, South Africa, UK, Congo, Germany, Kenya. And that's another surprise, India, right? So again, in terms of the pure numbers, yes, in Asia, China has more Protestant Christians. India has more Protestant Christians than Korea, but they're not it's not a major religion in these 2 countries, right? The growth of Protestantism in Korea had been particularly pronounced from the early 1960s to the end of the 1980s. And, well, this picture, not accurate, but you can see how I really like this particular figure because it shows you how there's this steep rise in membership in these 2 decades. And if there was one for 1980s and 1990s, it would have continued in the same trend. Okay? So just, again, without giving you a specific numbers, that's sort of what happened. Okay? Just a rapid rise in the number of Protestant Christians in Korea. And Korea boasts some of the largest churches in the world. Greater Seoul is home to 23 of the 50 largest churches in the world. And also 5 of the 10 largest churches in the world are found in Seoul, including Yeouido Full Gospel Church, with a total membership of 500 or 500,000. Its record is about actually 750,000, okay? Which was reached back in the early 1990s. And Korean churches now send more missionaries abroad than most other countries. The number of Korean overseas missionaries in 2022 was over 22,000 in 169 countries. This number itself may not tell you much, but look at this. It's that number is the second largest in the world after the USA. Okay, so the country with only like 130 years history sends the world's second largest number of overseas missionaries. Okay, after the USA. And remember, the USA has how many Protestant Christians? 160 million. Korea, how many? Less than 10 million. So Korea, the Protestant population in Korea is 1/16 of the USA, but the number of missionaries that Korean churches send is nearly half of the total of the US. So that's quite amazing. I'm not making any evaluative judgment here. I'm just saying, just making these numerical comparisons just shows you how Korean churches are really into this missionary activities overseas. Last observation about Christianity in Korea is that, again, in all of Asia, Korea is the only country where Protestantism is a major religion, let alone being the largest religion. Okay, so I just sort of selected. Well, when it comes to East Asia, you have Japan, China, Taiwan, right? Sometimes we say Northeast Asian countries, but as you can see here, no comparison. Okay, Japan, its population is 2.5 times larger than that of Korea, but the total number of Christians, not even 1 million. Okay, for both Protestant and Catholics. And for China, yes, it has a significantly large number of followers, 58 million, but that represents only about 4% of the total population. And when it comes to, cultural, social presence or influence, it's almost zero. Whereas in Korea, Protestantism is a major, cultural and social and to a certain extent a political force. Okay? Now, having said all these, I'm going to skip this part. The question remains, what are the factors which facilitated the rise of Protestantism as the largest religion in South Korea today? Can anyone take a guess? If you have read the book, the chapter, you should be able to give some answers, but any comments? Okay. I identify about 6 factors. Okay. I guess this would be ripe for the final exam. Well, first is what I would call national traumas and the hope for sovereignty. Okay, now, just to test if you remember anything from what I just said today, when was, so again, the focus is, actually I'll change the wording later. Let's be more specific. factors for the rise of Protestant Christianity in Korea. Okay? So when was Protestantism introduced to Korea? What year? Yes, 1884, right? And if you read up on the international context surrounding Korea at the time, the Joseon dynasty was in total decay, and at the time, 1884, Japan, Russia, China vied for control of Korea. Or in the beginning, not necessarily control, but they wanted to be the influencer over Korea, okay? Because the latter half of the 19th century was the sort of a heightened time for ports being opened, countries making trade pacts, and so on, right? So Korea at the time did not have any diplomatic ties with any other countries other than China. But again, it was a time of sort of great opening. You know, this is when like even the USA was exploring areas for not necessarily colonies, but at least to open countries for trade. Okay, so the arrival of Protestant missionaries coincided with this time of uncertainty. Okay, again, the royal court easily sensed that something was, boiling in the waters of the East Sea and the Yellow Sea, right? Again, unlike let's say a century before, things were different. So, and we had our own group of people staying in China, staying in Japan. They were sensing that times were changing, and also Japan, we were fully aware that Japan began to learn from the West. It was introducing all these Western ideas, science, and also technology, and they were already ahead in so many ways. Sort of more advanced than Korea, right? So again, in this time of uncertainty and also increasing sense of tension, so the leaders of Korea at the time wanted to build friendly relationship with the countries, which happened to be, the countries which sent all these missionaries, okay, which had no imperialistic ambition. So again, where did the missionaries come from? They came from countries like the US, Britain, Canada, Australia. None of the countries had engaged in any activity that came across as a threatening, right? And so, because Korea knew that its sovereignty was in danger, it wanted to seek help from these countries. And because the Americans and British or Canadians who were in Korea at the time happened to be the missionaries, the government was very cordial to them. Okay, so if you look at the missionary history of Japan, China, the immediate impression you get is that they were never welcomed by the elites in China or Japan. But it was not the case in Korea. They were welcomed, again, because Korean leadership wanted to maintain a good relationship with these missionaries so that they could seek help from these countries. So that's the first point. And whatever I gloss over, you could find more detailed information in the chapter that's assigned for religion in the second textbook. Okay? The second point is the provision of social services by the missionaries, and it has to do with medical care and education, and also institutional philanthropy. You see, sad to say, but we had many orphans back in the late 19th century, but we didn't have orphanage. They were really left to survive on their own. Okay? And did we have schools? Yes, we did, but only for the elite. Sons of Yangban, right? Which comprised only a small proportion. And what were they taught, these kids at Korean schools? They were taught how to read Chinese, how to read or interpret writings by Confucius. Did they learn mathematics? No. Did they learn about science? No. Chemistry? Physics? Philosophy? None. That was Korean school. But the missionaries come, they set up their schools, they started to teach these subjects for the first time ever, right? And also, the only medicine that Koreans had access to was Asian medicine or Oriental medicine, right? Which was typically herbal, right? So if you get sick, the Asian doctor would prescribe, packages containing herbs, right? Totally non-scientific, but these missionaries come with Western medicine, Western practices, and in the beginning they offer these services for free or at a minimal cost, right? So, and you could easily imagine how Koreans had only positive things to say about all these services, right? Again, otherwise unavailable to ordinary Koreans. I have some pictures. This is a Royal Korean Hospital, estimated to be from about 1897. It's a sort of a clinic, but the architecture is in Korean, Hanok, right? Missionaries with students at Baehwa Hakdang, one of the earliest schools that was opened by the missionaries in Korea, along with Ihwa. And that's the precursor to Ihwa University, right? It began as like a small school for girls, okay? So just to add one more point. So before the missionaries opened schools for girls, girls never went to school. Okay? So it was just a totally groundbreaking event at the time. And of course, many Confucian scholars were against it, right? Third factor is the affinity between Christianity and traditional religious values of Korean culture. And the affinity is typically between the Christianity and Confucianism and Christianity and shamanism. Okay? The Christianity and Confucianism connection has to do with the ethical teachings of Christianity, like the Ten Commandments. So the missionaries would preach to Koreans, look, you have nothing to give up in embracing this new religion because we teach the same principles as Confucianism, especially, honor thy father and thy mother. That's so filial piety, right? That was one. But more importantly, the connection was made between Protestant Christianity and shamanism in this way. If you pick apart things that are said in the Bible, what does Jesus Christ or what does God say? You pray and you get what you want, right? I mean, basically, I just said it very crudely, but in the same way as Koreans have prayed to shaman gods, God of Christianity does the same thing. Okay, if you're a good Christian, God will grant you what you need and what you want, right? Knock, door will be open to you, right? That kind of a phrase. So what the Korean pastors did was to find all those passages in the Bible that resonate with shamanistic or shamanic sort of values to say that Protestant Christianity is pretty much like shamanism. So the Korean pastors have shamanized, they say, shamanized Christianity, okay, or Koreanized Christianity. Okay, so that's the third factor. Fourth factor is, if you look at the period in which Protestant Christianity increased in the membership the fastest, it's during the period of countries' rapid urbanization and industrialization. Let me say that one more time. The fastest rise in membership, or the most rapid growth of Protestantism, coincides with Korea's rapid urbanization and industrialization. Okay? So what's the connection? Well, imagine millions of Koreans who used to live in rural areas, in intimate settings. They're now all living in places like Seoul, Busan, totally disconnected from their old ways of living, right? So they were alienated. They felt lonely. They felt, they were sort of lost in the crowd, right? So this is when churches served like ethnic church. You know how in the West, let's say the USA or Canada, there are many immigrant churches or ethnic churches, right? And why do, let's say, Korean immigrants to the USA go to Korean churches in the USA? Same thing. They go there to seek help, to seek fellowship, and to feel good, all right? So during the period of rapid industrialization and urbanization in Korea from the 1960s and 80s, churches served something akin to ethnic churches, let's say in the USA. Okay? And just to give you a sense of how this is a very good possibility, what's the proportion of Koreans who are Christians? Even if you add Catholics and Protestants together, it's about 27%. But you know what proportion of Koreans in the USA go to church? Over 70%. So that shows you how their immigration to this strange new land was a factor enough to make them go to an ethnic church so that they get a sense of comfort, identity, and belonging, as well as help and fellowship. So what's happening, or what happened at ethnic churches in immigrant countries, something similar happened also in Korea. Okay, when the country underwent rapid urbanization and industrialization. So to continue with the roles of these ethnic churches, these are all part of, again, what ethnic churches do, okay? Fifth factor, I'm going to skip this and just go to the sixth one. And I think this is the most important reason. And if I were to just self-brag about myself, there have been many writings on this phenomenon of the rise of Protestant Christianity in Korea. I'm the only one who identified this as a factor, and see if you would agree with me, okay? Let me not show you this. Now, what is the dominant religion in Latin America today? Christianity. What is the dominant religion in India? What is the dominant religion in the Middle East? What are the dominant religions in Africa? Yes. Now, you should not be grouping all of them together, but there are big distinctions. Okay? Now, did Christian missionaries try to penetrate the Middle East? Yes or no? Nothing happened. Why? Yes. They also tried to penetrate India. Although there are like 19 million Christians, they largely failed, right? Why? Existence of a dominant religion. Now, then, in contrast to India, the Middle East, what is the common factor of Central and Latin America, Africa, and Korea? Well, let's go back to Japan. Japan, missionaries also sent many, many more missionaries than they did to Korea. Nothing happened. Why? Because there was a very strong presence of the existing religion, like Shinto and Buddhism. Now, look, you remember the Joseon dynasty? Every religion was banned, right? So when the missionaries arrived in Korea, they were all amazed. They wrote in their diaries, wow, Korea is a strange country, because I've never seen a country without any religion. That's what they felt, okay? So ultimately, this is my point. Africa, Latin America, Korea shared the same fate, where there was no strong presence of strongly organized religions. So in Africa and also Latin America, they had tribal religions, okay, sort of religions for each village or tribe, but there was no organized religion like Christianity or Hinduism or Islam. That's why Christian missionaries were able to penetrate these societies. Okay? So that's the sixth factor. And does anybody have so I'll show you you can see the shades, right? All right, that concludes my presentation today. Does anybody have a comment or question? Okay. Was there a hand? Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm. Okay. So I think that's a good point. So where we could add the experience of colonization as a factor or non-factor for the rise of Christianity in any given country. All right. Thank you, Abby. All right. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.